We made a film for $55,000. It premiered at Venice. And afterward, Screen Australia handed us completion funding to finish it properly. That funding pushed our total spend right up against the threshold that would have unlocked a 40% tax incentive on top of it. But I didn't know that incentive existed, and I didn't know about the threshold. So we missed it. And that money that should have gone to paying our cast and crew above the rates that they were paid and paying me and my co-producers for the work that we'd put in properly never came. So if you're financing your first or your next feature film right now, this video is about the single biggest lever that you can pull that most filmmakers actually ignore when they build their finance plan. Not because it's complicated, but because no one actually tells you that it exists until you've already missed it, like I did. I'm Alexi Ouzas. I've produced 12 features in 12 years, financed everything from that $55,000 micro budget film all the way up to seven-figure productions. And I'm going to walk you through exactly how tax incentives work, not as a rebate that you find out about later, but as a tool that changes how much equity you actually need to raise and how much your investors make back from your film. Let's go back to West of Sunshine. That $50,000, $55,000 film, we shot it on the streets of Melbourne, had no stars, no studio, and no real safety net. We capped the budget deliberately because that number, that 55K, that matched my realistic downside of a completed micro budget film. In other words, I learned from my first film, a film called Plague, that a micro budget film, if it didn't kind of take off and go gangbusters, could still return around $50,000. Then Venice happened. So the film got selected for the Orizzonti competition, and Screen Australia stepped in as a result of that to provide completion funding. That would help us finish the film at the level that it deserved to be finished to premiere at Venice. Now, here's the part that still bothers me. That completion spend pushed our total production cost close to the minimum threshold, which is $500,000, required to access the Australian producer's offset, which is a government incentive that returns 40% of any qualifying expenditure once a film is over that $500,000 spend. If I had understood that at the time, if I knew how close we were, and if I'd structured the financing spend deliberately to clear that threshold, we could have layered a 40% incentive on top of the completion funding. So our budget probably would have sit somewhere around $600,000 or $700,000, adding another like $300,000 or $400,000 in rebate. Sorry, $200,000 or $300,000. Now, I didn't know that threshold was there. Nobody flagged it for me. And so I didn't structure it that way. And so that money never came. I completely missed out on it. Now, here's why this isn't a story about just one film. Most filmmakers treat tax incentives as a bonus, so something that shows up after delivery. It gets kind of worked out in the finance plan. Usually it's in a budget, and you can see like someone puts in the rebate figure there, usually a line producer, but it doesn't change the way that they structure their financing raise. And that's not the right way to do it. On the standard finance plans that I use today, the tax incentive covers roughly 30 to 40% of the budget. In fact, if I can't get a tax incentive on an independent feature film, I probably won't make that film. Distribution advances cover around 20%. Equity and grants cover the rest. So that means the incentives isn't the thing that you get back later. It's the thing that actually determines how much you have to raise from investors in the first place. So here's the actual math behind it, because this is where it gets interesting. Say you're financing $1 million film with no incentive structure. So you need to raise that full amount in equity. Under a standard deal, your investors get their money back plus a 20% premium. Then you split the net profit 50-50 between the production company and the investors. Now, if the film generates 1.2 mil in net profit, that return is being split across a full $1 million of equity. Now, structure the same film properly. There's a tax incentive in there that covers 300 to 400,000 of the mill. Let's say you get in some distribution advances that cover another 200K. Now your equity ask has dropped to $400,000 or $500,000, but it's the same film. It's going to make the same profit. You just need half the equity. So your equity pool has now halved. That means your investor's return per dollar invested goes up substantially. And it's not because the film has performed better, it's because their capital had to do less of the work because the equity pool was smaller to begin with. So this is a part I want you to really sit with because it's the exact mistake that I made. Especially in your early years making films, you're really just focusing on making the film, right? That is the paramount kind of goal. And that's natural to do that. And it's the part that makes it actually feel like you're doing the work. The finance structure does feel like something that's almost unknown. Like it's almost like I don't even want to bother with that. I just want to go make the film. So the incentive becomes something that you kind of deal with after the fact, or you go and speak to someone once the film's shot. But by that time, a lot of the spend has actually already happened, and you're kind of locking yourself into a financial structure. So by then, it's too late to structure the actual incentive around that. You either hit that threshold by accident or you don't even get there. And so on West of Sunshine, we didn't even get there and it wasn't structured properly to begin with. And that money really could have helped a lot for me personally as well as a producer and the filmmaker who co-produced with me. That would have given us a much bigger runway. We would have had more fees, more overhead, and that would have allowed us to get to the next film a lot easier. So when I build a finance plan for a film today, I'm asking one question before anything else. What sources of finance exist that I can bring in to make the equity ask as small as possible? The tax incentive is always the first answer. It's the backbone of a finance plan for an independent film. Before distribution advances, before grants, before gap financing, before any of that, your tax incentive is the backbone. If you're in a location without a tax incentive or a really competitive one, like in California, that's worth a real conversation. Sometimes the numbers justify going and shooting the film somewhere that has an incentive. And if you're planning to raise the full budget in equity and just pass back the incentive to investors as a rebate, rather than structuring it into the finance plan from day one, it's worth asking yourself honestly why you're making your own raise harder than it needs to be. If you're actively trying to close financing on your debut feature film or your next feature film right now, and you don't know exactly where your spend sits relative to the incentive thresholds that are available to you, that's not a small gap. It's something that you need to work out because there's potentially real money that you're leaving on the table that's going to make your whole raise a lot easier. Now, I work directly with filmmakers to build finance plans with the incentive, the debt, the equity, everything structured in correctly from the start, not just figured out after the fact. So if you want to do that, there's a link below to book a consultation if that's where you're at now. I'll see you on the next one.